in 1940.
Well, and there are questions pre-war in here, so
Yeah.
good. So were you good? Okay. So, we'll just start by, the date today is September 8th, 2007, and we'll start by introduction. If you could give us your full name, please.
Okay, my name is Richard H. Miller, and I always used the H because there were 4 Richard Millers in the 376th, and 3 of them are listed in the history book, none of which are me.
No kidding. Well, now, how did you call? Were one of you Richard and one of you Dick, or?
Well, apparently we were maybe in different squadrons or over there at different times because they were overseas. The first one overseas, the 376th, of course, they were the first ones to come home, too. The war ended May the 8th, and we flew our last mission, which I was on April the 15th. So we were ready to turn on to the initial point of the bomb run when we got a radio message saying, return to your base, pack your bags, you're going home. And we didn't waste any time turning around, but we caught flak going up and coming back. But we got back to the base and they said, well, half of you are going home. Said anybody with 15 missions or less stood no chance of finishing their tour of missions because the war is going to end before that would happen. So my crew had, well, we all had different numbers because we were a unique crew because our pilot, it was standard procedure for the pilot to go on his first mission as a co-pilot with an experienced crew to find out what combat's all about. And you can find out in one mission. So he went on his first mission and he got shot down. But he came back three weeks later, and then he went into 3 weeks of rehab. And by the time he was ready to fly combat again, the rest of the crew had roughly 14 missions. And we flew with 9 different pilots in the meantime. And we only ever got to fly 3 with our own pilot. But I've met, at various reunions, I've met many of the pilots that we flew with. So.
Well, tell us about you. When and where were you born?
I was born in Reading, Pennsylvania in 1922. And I always had an interest in airplanes. Of course, in 1922, there weren't many airplanes flying around. So as soon as I saw some airplanes flying around, I was maybe 10 or 11 or 12 when I really took to aviation. And I heard that a fellow by the name of Chamberlain was going to fly in to Reading, a Ford tri-motor plane, and I asked my dad to take me to the airport to see this airplane. And they were charging, I think, 50 cents for a ride. I think it held about 15 passengers. And I begged him to let me go up, and he said, you can't go up alone. And he wouldn't go with me, and my sister was there, and she wouldn't go with me. I said, well, let me go alone. So I went alone. And I fell in love with flying right then and there.
At the age of 10.
Yeah, and I built a lot of model airplanes and so forth. And when I graduated from high school in 1940, my buddy, classmate of mine, and I went to California to an aircraft school. He wanted to become an aeronautical engineer, and I wanted to fly him, but I had 20/30 eyesight in my left eye, and you couldn't be a pilot unless you had perfect vision. So I thought, well, if I can't fly him, I'll fix him. So I became a licensed mechanic in 1940. And I got a job in Sacramento working for the Air Force as a mechanic. And my job was to patch up the P-40s that were shot up by the Japanese. They were flown by the Flying Tigers in China. So when an airplane got too damaged for them to fix in the field, they'd crate them up and send them back to Sacramento. And we'd patch them up and send them back to China.
My goodness.
So that went on for I guess best part of a year.
So that was around 41.
41.
So because I was going to ask you, do you remember where you were, what you were doing when Pearl Harbor was attacked?
Well, I was flying in Sacramento with a friend of mine. We came down and landed, and we found out we were at war. And we were instructed to go to report to our job right away. So it was a Sunday, and we went to work Sunday afternoon after we came down flying. And coincidentally, on August the 8th, I believe it was, when Japan surrendered, I was flying again. When I came down, I found the war was over. But I transferred from Sacramento when the war started. I transferred from there to Olmsted Field, Pennsylvania, up near Harrisburg, and worked in engine installation department there. And I worked there one day, and my boss came around and said, "How would you like to transfer out of here?" I said, "I just got here yesterday. I'd kind of like to hang around and see what it's like." So I said, "Where do you want me to go?" He said, "Well, we have an opening at Pope Field, South Carolina, Rome, New York, and Juneau, Alaska." I said, "Well, I don't want to go anywhere." So the next day he came around, he said, "How would you like to go to Trinidad?" I said, "Where's that?" He says, "I don't know." So that night I went home. I lived 50 miles away from where I worked. I commuted every day. And I looked on the World Atlas, and I found out that it was a little island off the coast of Venezuela in the Caribbean. So they said I was a junior aircraft mechanic, and the next jump up would be a full mechanic, and the next jump would be a senior mechanic. They said, "We'll jump you from a junior to the senior, and we'll give you 25% bonus for being overseas in combat zone." So I had borrowed money to go to the aircraft school, so well, my dad said you'd be able to pay it back sooner if you get a good job like that. So I went. And I was there 14 months, living in regular GI barracks.
How old were you at this point?
20.
20.
And I was the chief civilian mechanic. There were only 6 civilian mechanics and about 75 GIs, and we had 2 hangars, all Quonset huts, big. And the master sergeant in charge, he and I got along very well, and I was in charge of the 6 civilian mechanics. And every time he'd give me a job, he'd maybe give me 6 or 8 or 10 GIs, and I'd have to teach them what to do. Yet they had objected our being there, making all this money, but yet they didn't know anything. So anyway, we got along. And I was there 14 months, and one day they posted a sign on the bulletin board, "Any GI or civilian that would like to become a pilot but had 20/30 eyesight, they would be accepted." So I thought, here's my chance. So I wrote to my draft board in Reading, Pennsylvania. I said, "Draft me, I want to be a pilot." And they did. I got in as a fighter pilot and passed all the tests and everything. And the tests and everything were conducted while struggling to live in a hotel in Miami Beach, Florida.
Struggling at the age of 20
Yeah.
in Miami Beach.
So anyway, I got in as a fighter pilot, and I got as far as a pre-flight school at the University of Tennessee. When I was there maybe a month or two, and General Arnold, who was head of the Air Force, he said, well, we have enough pilots to win the war. Tomorrow you'll be an aerial gunner. Well, I was hoping I could get back to Trinidad right then and there because I didn't want to do anything else but fly. So anyway, they sent us to gunnery school, 500 of us. And 2 days before we graduated, my father's mother died. He sent me a telegram. He says, can you get an emergency furlough? So I got a furlough and I went home for the funeral for 10 days. And then I reported back to the gunnery school in Tyndall Field, Florida. 499 guys shipped out, and I was there all alone. They each got a PFC stripe because they didn't know anything about airplanes, and they were just called career gunners on the B-29s. And they trained at Clovis, New Mexico. And because I was a licensed mechanic, I got corporal stripes, and I went to B-24s. It's the luckiest day of my life.
Absolutely.
I reported to Lemoore, California, to be assigned to a crew, and a crew was shipped in there, and they had an engineer on their crew, but the pilot didn't like him. He wanted a replacement, and he got me. And he was very happy because the normal GI engineer was not involved in aviation in civilian life. And I had gone to civilian school. GIs went either 3 or 6 months. I went a whole year. And then I worked almost 3 years for the Air Force as a civilian, both domestically and overseas. So my pilot thought, he's got to be a good engineer. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I got on the crew, and I think it was the best crew in the whole Air Force because we got along famously. We flew with so many different pilots, and they all had very nice compliments to throw our way. So we only got overseas in January of '45, and they told us that the war is scaling down. We won't be there to finish our 50 missions. Well, we were kind of happy to hear that, but then we went overseas to fly, so we flew, and of course the pilot went down on his first mission. Then I was supposed to fly my first mission the next day, but there was poor weather at the targets, so we didn't fly. But they had changed 4 engines on a B-24, which meant that there had to be a skeleton crew to fly this, just what they call slow time, just fly it in a circle for 4 hours. And if everything was working right, then it would go back on combat status. So I was picked for the engineer on this flight, and I had my fatigues on, I had corporal stripes. I reported out to the airplane, and the pilot said, "Who are you?" I said, "Well, I'm the engineer for this test flight." He said, "Well, you gotta be a tech sergeant." I said, "Well, give me 3 stripes and let's go. I'll be a better engineer then, right?" So he got in the airplane, he called the tower, he says, "I have a corporal out here for an engineer." He says, "I can't fly with the corporal, I gotta have a tech sergeant." They said, "Well, just stick around for a while and we'll look into the situation."
So that was a rule? I mean,
Yeah,
oh.
yeah. Couldn't even look at a B-24 unless you had full tech order rating, which for the radio operator and the engineer, they were tech sergeants because they went overseas as corporals. The other 4 gunners were PFC, and they were supposed to be staff sergeant. So we waited around about 45 minutes, and then a Jeep came out to the airplane, called me over, and he gave me a piece of paper, "You're not a tech sergeant." So I missed PFC, buck sergeant, staff sergeant. That was it. So then a couple days later, the weather cleared and I flew my first mission. We didn't know our pilot was dead or alive. He just didn't come back. And he went down in Yugoslavia. And the funny thing happened there too. I think every squadron, one of the 7 airplanes had a photographer on board to record the bomb strikes. And he caught a piece of flak in his left thigh. So, and they got shot up. They lost 2 engines over the target, and they decided they couldn't make it back to the base on 2 engines because the 3rd engine was coughing and carrying on. And they couldn't bail out because they couldn't throw this guy out, and he would have busted everything up when he landed. So they picked a field in Yugoslavia which was covered with 15 inches of snow, which was kind of a nice cushion. Not much, but some. And they finally lost the 3rd engine, and then I think they restarted number 2, so they had like 1.5 engines left, and they eventually lost number 2, and they picked this one field to land at, and in a case like this, they always came in high in case they had to have altitude to go somewhere. And they lost the 4th engine on the final approach and had to what they call dead stick, no engines. And there was always a rivalry between B-17s and B-24s. And the B-17 crews always said that the B-24 glides like a rock when it has no engines. Well, my pilot said, Slim, don't let anybody tell you that a B-24 won't glide without engines. Of course, you got to get up a little speed. So they landed dead stick, and they all walked away from it, and they didn't know if they were in enemy territory or friendly territory. But the pilot thought, well, maybe if I would take the injured photographer towards there was a farmhouse there. He said, if we'd hobble up there, maybe they'd have pity on us being one as injured. So they got halfway to the house, and a fella came running out of the house towards them, and my pilot yelled, do you speak English? And the guy said, yeah, I'm from Milwaukee. He went overseas before the war, and the war broke out, and he couldn't come home. So he acted as their translator. He hid them from the Germans for 3 weeks and took good care of them. And they finally flew a C-47 in and picked up maybe 30 guys and flew them out. But the snow had melted in the meantime, which made the grass field very soggy. And when they wanted to take off with these 30 guys in there, the mud was up almost to the axles, and with full throttle, the airplane wouldn't move. So about 100 Yugoslavs got under the airplane on their backs and lifted the airplane out of the mud. And as they opened the throttles, the airplane started to move, and they'd move until the airplane was going too fast. They just dropped down in the mud, and they got off the ground.
Amazing. Oh, and this was this pilot's first mission.
Yeah.
But how long was it before you heard? I mean, you didn't know what happened to him.
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
And then he had 3 weeks of rehab before they would let him fly.
Now, what squadron were you in?
514th.
514. Mm-hmm. What, in your opinion, what are the strengths and the weaknesses of the B-24?
Well, it turned out to be a very difficult plane for our co-pilot to fly. I don't know how he got his wings. He was not a good pilot. He could fly formation, but landing was rather tricky. But it was a rugged airplane. It could take a beating, and because some returned with as many as 700 holes and still in one piece. I liked it. It was a very good airplane. I would prefer it over 17. In fact, when the group broke up to come home before the war ended, they singled out half of the people that would come home. They had less than 15 missions, and the rest of us were supposed to stay over and be transferred farther north in Italy. And they told us to take our tents down and fold up our cots and keep one blanket, that there would be somebody in to pick us up and take us up north. Well, they came in B-17s to pick us up. Nobody wanted to go. But we went, and they flew us up to Cerignola, and we wound up in the 456th Bomb Group, which a high school classmate of mine was one of the original pilots in that squad, in that group.
No kidding.
Well, there was a number of crews that were transferred up there ahead of us, and the other three fellows on our crew that stayed over with me, they were sent, two of them were sent to the 456th, the Bombardier was sent to the 454th, and I didn't know where anybody was because they had transferred, and we transferred up later. The one pilot and I were the last two to go, and we got up there at lunchtime, and we had our mess kits full of food. There was no place to sit because there was the 456 crews and the guys from the 376 that had transferred up in the last 2 or 3 days. It was jammed until I heard the last table down at the left end of the dining hall. Somebody's yelling, "Hey, Dick, hey, Dick." Here it was the crew that lived next door to me at the 376th. And they said they had lost a radar operator and a nose gunner. So they only had 4 enlisted men on their crew. They said, "Hey, we're a 6-man tent. There's one guy there and there's 4 of us. There's a spare bunk. Why don't you try and move in with us and maybe get on our crew as a nose gunner?" They had an engineer, which their pilot didn't like. But I said, okay, so I moved in with them. And the fellow that was in there when they moved was from my hometown. And that's not the end of the story. When the war was over and I came home and got married, and I worked in a battery factory that was owned by my father-in-law, and it was common practice for the company to supply whole milk as a deterrent to lead poisoning. And the fellow that was delivering the milk to the plant was the guy from Denton, Italy.
My goodness. You have many coincidences in your career, don't you?
And there's a lot more too. I don't have time for
Oh,
everything.
goodness. Well, well, do you recall your first combat mission? What was that like?
Well, my first mission, I was assigned as an assistant engineer, so I could learn what the engineer does and so forth. So I was what they call a sandbagger. I just went along for the ride, just observed. Ordinarily, and the engineer let me do it, I had a flak suit between the pilot and co-pilot. I didn't have a seat. The pilot and co-pilot, the only guys that were sitting down on the mission. The rest of us stood, kneeled, or laid, or whatever. Oh, the upper gunner had a seat in his turret, but I had a flak suit under me. I had the control pedestal in front of me to slow down any flak coming from that direction. I had the co-pilot on this side to slow down any flak, and the pilot on this side. I was wearing a flak suit, so the only place I got hit was in the buttocks, as Forrest Gump said.
Right.
I was the safest place in the airplane. And I was to continually check the engine gauges to see if everything's running properly. And one of the best jobs I had was, and the most important, was to check on the gas to see how we're doing on gas. Because sometimes if you get a target that maybe you can't, for some reason or other, you can't drop the bombs, they give you 2 alternate targets. And in fact, sometimes you run low on gas. And I've heard of guys running out of gas on the final approach to the field. And that's a little scary. We landed one time, and I had all the engines on what they call cross feed, so that they all feed out of the tanks, 4 tanks at the same time. So if you run out of fuel, they all quit at once instead of one here or one there, which is dangerous. That throws you one way or the other. Where was I?
Yeah, I lost our train of thought.
Oh, we were sent on a mission. No, I was talking about the first mission. I didn't look out the window too much. I had a flak helmet on, and I had the flak helmet down low enough and my head low enough that I couldn't see out the windshield. So I didn't see much flak at all. And at the briefing, when we landed, the first target was Vienna, which was, I believe, the 3rd heaviest protected target in the war. Ploesti oil field was the first, Berlin was second, and Vienna was third. And that was my first mission. And at the briefing, after the mission, they ask you a lot of questions. They asked, how was the flak? I said, didn't see any. I said, everybody else said heavy, intense, and accurate. I said, I didn't see it. So I don't know if they believe me or not, but I didn't see any flak.
So you had a.
But we went after the German troops on the Russian front, and they told us that if we couldn't see the ground, we should not drop the bombs because we might hit the Russians. So they gave us 2 alternate targets in case. So we got to the first target, and the target was socked in, couldn't see the ground, so we didn't drop the bombs. We went to 2 alternate targets, couldn't drop the bombs. So we decided to come home. Well, it was normal practice for only the lead airplane to carry a bomb sight. And our bombardier, as well as the other bombardiers in the other 5 airplanes, would ride the nose turret instead of the nose gunner. And when he'd see the bombs drop out of the lead airplane, he would salvo his. Well, he didn't drop his bomb because of the weather. And after we turned around to come home, he decided to get out of the turret and let the nose gunner in the turret in case you see any fighters. So right behind the turret is a small desk, the full width of the nose, and on there is a salvo switch. Well, the bombardier was getting out of this turret with his big clodhopper fleece-lined boots. He kicked the salvo switch after I closed the bomb bay doors. And the bombs landed on the doors. Now the doors slide on rollers up the side of the fuselage. Well, when they're closed, they cover the whole width of the fuselage, which is probably 6 or 7 feet. Well, the bombs bent the doors and knocked the rollers out of the channels, and the doors were hanging straight down, lower than the landing gear. So, fortunately, the bombs can be dropped 2 ways. They can be dropped safe or armed. If they drop safe, that means the arming wires, which go from the bum shackles to the tail fuse and the nose fuse, and these little propellers there, the arming wires stay hooked to the shackles, and the little propellers, as they spin out and fall, they arm themselves on the way down. So the arming wires fortunately stayed in. So I got a hold of, I think, 2 or 3 of them and twisted them together. They were probably 5 feet long. And I bent it in a V so I could put it down into the slipstream and hook a roller and lift the doors up and wire them fast. But it was kind of tricky because the catwalk is 7 inches wide, and that's about almost as wide as my boot. And on the side of the fuselage where the cables go back to the tail, there's a channel there about 1.5 inches wide. So you have 1 foot up here on that channel and the other one down here on the catwalk. You don't look down, but there was nothing below, and I had a parachute harness but no parachute. And you have a heated suit, but you can't plug it in because in the Bombay there's no place to plug in the heated suit. And at 50 below zero, it's a little chilly. And what else? No oxygen. There's no oxygen outlet. But you can live for 4 or 5 minutes without oxygen. And there was always a danger of that foot slipping off that channel. That's what I was worried about.
Yeah, bump or...
But I had to do that to the 4 Bombays. And then one time we had 1,000-pound bombs, and one of them hung up in the shackles, didn't drop. So I called the bombardier. I said, Mike, we have a hangar. So he came back to the Bombay, and we went into the Bombay, and I had a screwdriver because there's a screwdriver slot where you trip it, and generally that'll let the bomb drop. So I just had the blade of the screwdriver with a handle there, and I just, for the heck of it, I just hit the bomb, and it fell out. And in a case like that, you have to notify the navigator because he has to record the latitude and longitude where that bomb hit. Well, I watched it go down, and it looked like it hit about, 100 feet from a farmhouse. I can just imagine how the dishes rattled in the kitchen
Dear,
with a 1,000-pound bomb going off.
goodness gracious. You've got some interesting tales to tell.
Yeah.
Out of the ordinary.
The only other thing that I can think of at the moment, well, at the moment anyway, we almost didn't get to go overseas at all. Because in our training at March Field, California, we had to make, it was either 3 or 5 maximum load takeoffs. B-24 fully loaded is 65,000 pounds. And we had to practice taking off with a full load. And we only had 93 octane gas. Overseas, we used 100 octane. So we were fully loaded, and one of the engineer's jobs is to call out the airspeed as you go down the runway so that when you reach like 125 that you can pull the airplane off the runway. So I was counting, 90, 95, 100, 105, 110. I got up to 120 and was just ready to say 125 when the right main tire blew. And of course that created drag on that side, so we did a 720, 2 turns. Didn't hit any other airplanes or anything, but the main tire and the nose wheel tire caught fire, And at the first reunion that I attended in 1995, my upper gunner was here, and he said, Slim, I was really skinny. He said, I never saw you move so fast. I said, me move fast? I said, that's impossible. No, he says, you really? I said, what did I do? He said, well, you grabbed the fire extinguisher, you opened up the Bombay doors and went out and put out the fire. I said, I did? I said, I don't recall that. I said, well, then what? He said, I don't know. He said, you just put out both fires. I said, well, I apparently figured that with 500 gallons of gas right above the tire, of course it was only 92 octane, but he said, well, it would have made as big a boom as 100 octane.
Right. You're right.
But they put us in another airplane and sent us up again, and then I had an opportunity to stay home too, because we were shipped to, from March Field, California, we were shipped to San Francisco to pick up a new B-24 and fly it to the South Pacific to fight the Japanese. Well, we got to our Hamilton Field on Christmas Eve, and I think we processed on Christmas Day, and a couple days later, instead of sending us to the South Pacific, they put us on a train and sent us to Virginia. And we wound up at Camp Patrick Henry, Virginia, waiting for a boat to go over. We didn't know where we were going. We thought we were going to South Pacific, but they put us on the America that they had renamed to West Point out of Newport News. And 2 days out of Newport News, they announced on a loudspeaker system that this ship is bound for Naples, Italy. And we figured, oh boy, sunny Italy. This was January. We got there in the middle of a blizzard. There was about 6 inches of snow on the ground, freezing to death. And they put us in what they call a 40-8 from World War I, a boxcar that was supposed to take 40 men and 8 horses, and shipped us across Italy. And it was so cold, we built a fire on the floor, and by the time we got where we were going, we had a hole about 18 inches in diameter. Every time the train would stop, we'd get off the train and look for some wood to burn, trees or whatever. And we finally got there, and of course our tough times were rewarded by being assigned to the 376th, because that was the best group in the whole war.
Oh.
It was the first one formed after Pearl Harbor. It was the first one that was deployed overseas. It was the first one that dropped bombs on European soil. It was the first one to be based on European soil in San Pancrazio, because up until that time they had been operating out of 8 different bases in North Africa.
My goodness. Now, how many total weeks were you with the 376th?
I was there from January to April 15th, April 19th.
Were you, obviously you sounded like you were close with the crews that you were, at the time you were with them.
Oh, yeah.
So, best friends.
We're buddies.
Good buddies.
Buddies to the end. We lost one crew. We were flying below and behind, and the crew up there, puff of smoke, and that's it.
Were you ever wounded?
No, but we almost crashed once. We were going to Brenner Pass, which was a famous target, and the fellows that I flew home with, I didn't fly home with my own crew. I flew home with the crew next door to me. They were flying ahead of us again, and they took a hit on the left side, and they were blown out of formation. I thought, oh my God, and we just lost this other crew. And no sooner did that happen, we didn't get hit, but the explosion, the flak burst was close enough that just the impact of the explosion threw us up. We were straight up and down with the wing, and we dove right through the rest of the formation. And I could count the rivets on the other airplane. And my pilot yelled, "John, help me." I thought, oh my God, what's he need? And we lost 8,000 feet before we got control of the airplane again. And we were only at 18,000 feet, and the mountains, the Alps at that point were 14,000. So we were 4,000 feet low on the wrong side of the mountain. If we'd have been on the south side of the mountain, we would have been able to come right home. But we had to climb, and we lost 2 engines. And somehow or another, the pilot figured out how to get over the mountains. He said, "What do we do, Slim?" I said, "Head for Switzerland." And I think he got a heading from the navigator, and we headed for Switzerland. But then I looked at the rest of the airplane. I went running around looking, and everything looked good enough. I said to the pilot, I said, "We're going to make it back to the base." So we got a heading back to the base, and we got there all alone. We beat the rest of the squadron there because we opened up the engines, and we got there before them. And the CO was out there. "Where's the rest of the flights?" So they're coming. We landed all alone. They were a little worried.
You doing okay? Very good. Okay. Do you remember? I mean, your buddies. You obviously stayed close during and after. You've obviously stayed in touch all these years.
Well, I think we had a special rapport with our officers. They were the finest guys I ever met, and they still are. Unfortunately, the pilot canceled out last week. He would have been here.
Oh, can you hold this up? I'm going to have you just hold it like this, and we'll just make sure it's not being in a glare, and he's going to photograph it, and then you can tell us about this group. Let's see. That's great. Tell us about this group.
Well, the pilot is from Los Angeles. Originally, he was from Minneapolis. And the co-pilot was from California. The radio operator was from Santa Ana, California. The tail gunner was from Santa Rosa, California. And the ball gunner, lower turret operator, he used to be the assistant secretary treasurer of our veterans group. And the bombardier was from Nesquehoning, Pennsylvania. And the upper turret operator was from Springville, Utah. And let's see, who else is there? Radio operator, co-pilot. Oh, that's all of them. And we flew with 14 different pilots, and I believe every one of them gave us A+ on how we got along and how we knew our jobs. And just a great bunch of guys. I still think we had the best crew in the whole works.
Sounds like you certainly worked well with all the close calls you had and incidences that you've talked about today. Now, what was this event where you're all...
This was 3 years ago at the reunion.
Oh, okay. This is a recent picture.
And I have to tell you the story about the uniforms, because my second wife was a nurse, and she attended her first reunion in '97. I lost my first wife after 50 years, and I lost my second one after 4 years. But she attended her first reunion. She said, well, this is a military reunion. How come nobody's in uniform? I said, well, the uniforms shrink an inch every 5 years. And she said, well, can't you buy new ones? I said, new World War II uniforms? She said, Army-Navy stores. So we went to a local Army-Navy store, and we went to another Army-Navy store. They both had pants and khaki shirts, but made by different companies, and each company has their own idea of what color khaki really is. So I said, well, I don't know if we can get uniforms that match. So I remembered that our radio operator's wife used to sell uniforms. She had 3 stores in California selling uniforms. So I called her and I said, Barbara, where did you buy your uniforms? She said, well, I remember the name of the place, but I don't remember where they are. I said, well, all I need is the name. So she gave me the name, and I called my local reference library, and she said, well, there's 12 companies by that name. I said, can't be. It's got to be one company and 11 branches. So I said, any in California? She said, yeah, I have 2 places in California. She gave me both those. I called. She said, there's one in Montebello and one in Sacramento. I said, well, give me the one in Sacramento. I used to live there. Maybe I'd know who it is. So she gave me the number, and I called him and told him I wanted World War II uniforms. Oh, call our home office in Miami. So I called them, told them what I wanted. Yeah, we can supply it. I said, same color? He said, yep. I said, okay. I said, can I get a sample? I said, I'll pay for it. She said, yes, but she said, I can't deal directly with you. I have to deal with the retailer. So I gave her my measurements. They sent me, she called her Baltimore warehouse. They had it in stock, my size. They packed it up that day, shipped it overnight, and I had it the next morning. So I tried it on, perfect fit. So I immediately, 3 of our crew were online, so I sent them emails right away. The other guys I called and got their dimensions, and ordered. I knew we were going to have 5 guys at the first reunion in uniform. So I got all their measurements. I got the uniforms sent to me, and I parceled them out and sent them to them. And I told them to seal their patches and all that stuff on, you know, and the medals and what have you. And got everything shipshape, except my bombardier. He says, I'm not going to wear that thing. He said, I wore it not long enough. I'm never going to wear it. I said, you're going to wear it? He says, I'm not even going to take it to the reunion. I said, you're going to take it? I said, I'm in command of this crew. You're going to listen to me. I said, I commanded the crew in the air. You're going to listen to me on the ground.
Good for you.
So we all brought our uniforms, and I asked the president, how are we going to present ourselves, because nobody ever showed up in uniform. He says, why don't you at the main banquet Sunday night march in behind the color guard? I said, gee, that's a good idea. So that year we were in Kansas City, Oklahoma City. And lo and behold, the banquet came and went, no color guard. It was a holiday weekend, Labor Day weekend. All the soldiers were home on leave. So we didn't have a color guard, we didn't march in. And Monday morning they had the memorial breakfast where they announced the names of the people that passed on. So Monday morning, the bombardier and the president were in the dining room, And the president said to the bombardier, gee, it's a shame you guys went to all this trouble and then we didn't have a color guard to lead in so you could follow. The bombardier said, can't we be the color guard? So here's a guy, didn't want to wear the uniform, he makes the arrangements. So we've been the color guard ever since, except last year. We only had 3 guys last year. We only have 3 this year again because 2 guys canceled out. But the president had already canceled the color guard from a local army base, whatever it was. So he said, you guys have to be a color guard, even if you have only 3. I said, well, I'll look for another guy with khaki pants. I didn't find anybody yet.
No, you will. You will. Oh, that's fabulous. Well, you all must feel a bit like the Band of Brothers,
Yes,
certainly.
we were very close.
Did you receive medals, awards?
Well, I received all my medals when the day I was discharged. And it was really not a happy event because I was discharged from Fort Bliss, which is a field artillery base in Texas. I wasn't discharged from an air base. But I was glad to get discharged anyway.
Right. You doing okay? Well, this has been fabulous. I wish we could go on for another hour. I appreciate all your stories and your time.
Yeah, there's a story connected to our history book too. I don't know if you ever saw our history book.
Oh, I have absolutely seen it. I've gone through and circled every place where my dad is in it, and absolutely. What story is that?
They didn't think it could be reprinted, and it took me 2 years of going.